Really excited to talk to this room. I hope you're as excited about policy as I am. As you heard, I was the first hire in India. And the reason I emphasize that is just to say that as your businesses start to grow into other geographies, invariably the first person you put on the ground as you start to expand your team is actually a policy person. And that's the same what happened to me when I was at WhatsApp as well. I was her first hire in India back in 2018 when they started their operations. And so, I think this could be a good peg for you all to think about why policy is a very critical function as you think about building teams, accessing newer markets, or even just accessing newer verticals just within the same geography as well, right? And why you need to get ahead of what your potential risks, in those sectors could be, no matter where you're really operating. Of course, in healthcare, more highly regulated, financial sector, highly regulated, but then there are others as well which overtly don't really seem to you as being highly regulated sectors, but you might want to start to think about some of the policy principles early on. So yeah, you already got a short intro, so I'll just dive right in. Um, what is really policy all about? And I think the way I think about it very clearly is that the policy function is actually in the service of the business function. And so really the goal is, as a policy person, can I make sure that I give the business the license to operate in that country, in that vertical, and therefore it becomes really critical that you continue to engage far more proactively and you get ahead of the regulation in many of the conversations. So, if you think of it with that framing, then hopefully policy persons will come across less as blockers and more as people who can enhance your business and help you stay clear of all the potential risks that are to come. I think trust building is important across, but more so in the policy function. And therefore, like I was saying, relationship building, stakeholder mapping, making sure that you're meeting your stakeholders early on, telling them about the business, why you do what you do, and how do you really do it, and that you are obviously committed to working with them. Having that open channel with a policymaker or with your key stakeholders, I feel, is like half the battle won. The fact that you showed up, you spoke with them, and they know where to find you is often just what they're looking for. And so when later, you have a crisis, it doesn't feel like it's too much of a crisis that you cannot manage because at least you have open channels to speak to the right people and share what your point of view on that is. Not that you will not get the regulation or you will not get the outcome, but hopefully you'll be able to shape it more proactively vis-a-vis the regulation just kind of being shoved down at you and you having no context, no voice. And that's why I think this is really, really important as you think about even a small business, that when there are these consultations when it comes to data protection bills and the big regulations, that you do in some way participate in those dialogues. I think I kind of spoke a little bit about this, but I think it certainly builds maturity because it helps you to think a little bit ahead. If you're a startup, if you're a small business, you're often just thinking about what is right in front of you. But as you think about what are the risks, you then start to think in the more 3-year, 5-year, kind of timeline. And that just allows you to think a little bit more around what are the other risks over, I mean, of course you'll have competition, but then what else from a policy lens you should be thinking about, and just increases the canvas of how you really evaluate the strength of your business in the long run. It also, in many ways, I would say, creates freedom to operate. If you are very clear about which direction you're going in, and you know what your policy regulations are, it just allows you to then even venture into areas that are gray. And often, if you're a startup, you're always, in many ways, innovating and pushing boundaries, which means you will be operating in the gray. And that's okay, and that's fine. But as long as you know what your position on much of those gray areas are, that just helps you, one, document it. And as you're building the business, even from if it's a technology business, you are just focusing and emphasizing more with your CTO and your CIOs that can you make sure, and also if you have a CTO and a CIO in the first place. But if you don't, then at least you do it yourself as a founder. That when you're coding, you're like documenting a lot more, and you're thinking about if somebody was to come in and talk about principles around transparency or anything around privacy, safety, you're thinking about that as you're building the product. And what happens then is you're not, if it's not an afterthought, all of the questions that you may or maybe never get, but you're just very well prepared. And that just allows you to feel far more confident about what you're doing, and also go out there and really talk about the strong principles based on which you're building your business. And honestly, you know, very often I've realized that these could also be business differentiators. If you talk about safety and you do it in a way that is, safe in terms of usage, whether that's for children, for adults, that can often be a differentiator, because if people find that the results that they're getting from your technology, if it's a consumer platform or even a B2B, of course, B2B, the standards are much higher, but even in a consumer platform, if your consumers and users feel that the results they're getting out of what your tool is providing them are safe and very well within the guardrails, you will see that they will want to keep coming back to you. And we've seen that at OpenAI as well, right? Like where safety is really truly embedded in the way we think about AI models. And so, and we also do a lot of red teaming, right? So every time we actually put a model out there, we spend thousands of hours going out to experts across geographies who then actually really like stress test our systems to tell us what is it that our models are responding to when it comes to specifically very ambiguous or tricky questions, which could be around political bias, which could be around child safety, and things like that, right? And so we actually do that work proactively so that when we launch the model into the world, where all of you can then start to use it, is that some of that has already been thought through and is very much baked into the core process. So it's not an afterthought that there's a crisis and a challenge, and now let me go out and fix it. But we think about it early on. A prime example was, our models being, having a very sort of sycophant voice where, no matter what you said, it would be like, yeah, it's amazing, go do it, And I think we kind of realized that obviously that's validating often, bad behavior as well. And so we quickly went back and worked on our models and then quickly, released a more upgraded version. And I hope all of you are enjoying using what we have in ChatGPT 5 today, but I would love to hear more and get more feedback post this session on that. So I think what I'm really trying to emphasize is that if it can be part of your building process and not an afterthought, it often can act as a product differentiator and really in some ways also build consumer stickiness. Um, I think when it becomes critical, I think for me, I feel it's once you have an MVP, once you have a product market fit, you're ready to go out and scale. I think you should start thinking about a policy already. Does that necessarily mean, and I advise quite a few startups when it comes to this, that you need to hire someone 24/7 and get a headcount? Not really. Maybe that's not the scale you're at. But I do think that you should go out and look at policy advisory firms or even legal firms who can give you a very high level understanding on whether you're within the bounds of the law or not. And if you're not, like what are the 2 3 things that you need to quickly fix? And if it's early on in the business, you can pivot and you can make those adjustments. Very often when you're too far in, it becomes a little bit difficult. So I mean, if you want to kind of put a specific number to it, I do feel like when you have at least, around, I would say about, 1 million users, you should start thinking about, okay, what do I really need to do from a product lens and from a policy lens, and really start thinking about that. Um, I think kind of spoke about this, but if you want to talk about the profile of the person, like I said, policy is very unpredictable. So certainly somebody who thrives in chaos and can very, very quickly pivot, obviously understand how to build human connections and how to really be with, how to make sure that your stakeholders understand your point of view, and that's very critical. And I think the last thing which is very important is that they should understand that they are here to be in service of the business. They are here to make your life easier. They are here to make sure you can go to newer geographies, you can expand your business, and you can continue to do and make strides in the innovation that you want to make. So they are there to tell you what the risks are, put a mitigation plan, but not to tell you that you should not be doing that, because that's really not the role. So if there are people who are telling you this is not, I mean, of course, within the guardrails of law, if you're not, if you're, as long as that's in place, everything else, the approach should be how can we make sure, how can the policy person in your team make sure that they're supporting your business goals? Yeah, I also think, from a general policy function, I think alignment is the most important thing. Just talking to product, talking to comms, legal, your business functions, and just making sure that how you're and the direction in which you want to go, there is a broad alignment, and there is also very standardized comms that you want to do on some of the policy related issues, like I said, around privacy, data, safety. Broadly, these are areas that come up. And so, what is your point of view on it? How do you really want to get that point of view out? That could be in closed door conversations, that could be with engaging with your key stakeholders in the government, and then very often even civil society, right? So I will give some examples after this so you kind of, can put this into real perspective and what does it mean when policy is in action. Yeah, and so, I'll talk about these two examples only because one is where a proactive approach was able to really mitigate risk. And then the other one is when I was brought in late and I was only doing reactive work, and how like that, how the two playbooks, number one, different. And then it'll also highlight very clearly to you why you need to do this proactively and you can get ahead of it, and why it's so critical to do it proactively. So I'll start off really with Truecaller. I joined them to lead the policy function. And how many of you here use Truecaller? Okay, fair amount, right? And so, um, you know, the narrative was that Truecaller actually, takes all your data, has access to all your phone book contacts, and so it's not safe, and so you should not use it. So there was a big privacy concern. And then the second challenge was just in terms of perception, where they were perceived to be a Chinese company and actually not a Scandinavian company. And so as I walked into this role, those are the two things that were really top of mind for me on how we should go out and fix. And and I hope I fixed it. But you can tell me after this call, after this conversation, whether your perception kind of shifted in the last 3-4 years on how Truecaller really adds value to your life. And so what I decided to do is, like, when we went out and did some product research and consumer research, we realized that actually most women told us that 50% of them use Truecaller as their first line of defense, which means if they don't know who's calling them, they do not pick up that phone. And as a woman, I totally could identify with that, right? Because you don't know, once you pick up the phone, who's really on the other side and what you're going to really put yourself through if this is not the right call that you've picked up. And so we decided to really do and anchor our narrative for the next 6 months, 7 months into this key insight that we got from consumer research, saying that they do not pick up the phone unless somebody identifies it. And then it was like, okay, well, how can we take action, right? And so typically people told us, well, I just blocked that call. And then the Truecaller ecosystem kicked in, because if I block a call and 5 other women or 5 other people also block the same call, it kind of then starts to bubble up into the ecosystem saying that this number is not safe. And so that's where the technology stepped in. And then I was like, okay, but this is great, but I can just change my number if I'm somebody who's a bad actor, and I can come back and keep harassing you again. So how do we really fix this in society as well? And so therefore the third step we did is, let's tie up with law enforcement and make sure that a lot of these numbers are reported. And if it's really, serious harassment, can we find a way for enforcement to collaborate with us and actually go out and take action in the real world? And the ability to just get everyone on the table who cared about this issue and discuss it and talk about it as a campaign, I think really changed, one, how Truecaller was, of course, perceived in the ecosystem, but we were also able to really bring shift in society and bring some change. We went around and actually did these campaigns and similar conversations like these in smaller cities around the country. And you won't believe it, with law enforcement, with government stakeholders and political leaders all sitting on stage, when you opened up the conversation to the audiences, invariably there would be a girl who'd raise her hand and say, I've been through exactly this. I went to law enforcement, no action was taken. And then you suddenly had the law enforcement person on the stage saying, don't worry, come talk to me, we'll fix this problem. And I think that's how you bring change in society, when you're able to bring a policy intervention with a technology impact and scale that it brings, like a company like Truecaller. So I think this is when you do proactive engagement, you try and get ahead, you're able to bring positive change. And then I'll talk to you about WhatsApp. When I joined them in 2018, the whole misinformation challenge was really at its highest. And I'm sure if you just think back, there were a lot of issues around the kind of fake news that was traveling on WhatsApp. And not to say fake news did not exist before technology or before WhatsApp, but obviously the fact that you have 500 million users, that the veracity and the velocity with which that misinformation flows becomes really, really fast. And so when I had already come in, this was a big challenge. It was brewing up. It was a big concern. And so then we moved into reactive mode and said, okay, how do we really collaborate with the ecosystem to, in some way, raise awareness and education of this? But also, what can we do on product? And so I think just we'll talk about one small thing where we limited the number of forwards of a particular message, and said we'll only do it to 5. And I know it's like really back in the day when you think about technology. We've come so far. Today we're talking about AI, but I think back in the day, to really in some way limit engagement over safety was a big trade-off that we made. And we were very comfortable at WhatsApp making that trade-off at that time because that was the need of the hour. And so I think just thinking about potential risks that could come, but if you are reactive, then you need to make some hard decisions and hard calls, and either it'll come forced down on you, or if you're able to think and be more in charge and proactive of the narrative, then you can do that earlier on in the game, which is why proactive engagement is important. And so also I feel if there's proactive engagement, you build those relationships in peacetime, as opposed to what was happening with me at WhatsApp, where I would walk in and everyone would be like, this is just not the time for you to be doing anything as far as India is concerned in terms of growth or any other campaigns around just increasing the use of WhatsApp. We were really thinking about launching WhatsApp Pay. And at that time, there was a lot of this conversation on if the platform is really not safe, there isn't much that we would want to do, and we would want to have launch on your product itself. So I think those are the kind of blockers that come in when you're not thinking about safety, privacy, data, all of these pieces very much within your early stage. And so it was an approach of what can we do on product, and then what can we do with civil society. And so I'm sure you all must have, you must be recalling the famous campaign, the education campaign that we launched, that WhatsApp launched, called Share Joy and Not Rumors. And so I think just along the lines, we said, let's also make sure that there is education and awareness on how do you spot misinformation, what is really a fake news, how can you work with fact checkers, and how can you find them to actually make sure that a lot of that information gets debunked. So I think what I want to highlight really is the fact that proactive engagement and just knowing who your stakeholders are will always put you in a far better position to shape which direction you want to go in, as opposed to just like thinking about this reactively. Um, yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of covered most of this, but I do believe, that trust with your users, with your stakeholders, your influencers can really act as a absolutely as a strategic advantage, which often, product folks don't necessarily think about. And I think those are the new perspectives that you get when policy people have a voice on the table early on in these conversations. So yeah, that was it.